Oscilloscopes are cool. So let's talk about how reality is explained by these oscilloscopes. And we will corroborate that with some of what Bashar's been saying, if you're familiar with Bashar, and his a channel by way of Daryl Anker. But an oscilloscope is basically a way of measuring a varying voltage. So typically in the analog world, you just see like a graph being displayed, right? And this is actually just one point that is moving so fast that it gives this impression of motion, and graphs and things like this. And what's really interesting and cool is that if you actually combine that with another channel, you can now have this point dancing around in all sorts of space. And it creates this illusion of form. So what we have ultimately is sound creating shape. And you can actually find that shapes have a sound as well. It's a two-way situation. I find this really interesting because of what Johann Wolfgang von Goethe said, right? That's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it, that name? But he's a great philosopher, you know, and worth checking out a lot of his literature. He said that architecture is frozen music. So that's interesting because we are architecture, right? The human anatomy, is that not architecture itself? So when we look at the oscilloscope itself, and this is actually a track by Clark, or I think it might be a remix, called Superscope, and it starts with a blank screen, and this could be said to be the divine potential, right? The universal mind in potential, yet to have been realized, right? The breath of Shiva waiting to be exhaled into creation. And then the point arises, which could be said to be the Buddhic body, right? The point of attention, right? Or this Simsam, if you're familiar with sort of Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism. This is like a contraction in space and time from which this animation can occur. And now you've got activity, right? Now you've got, like, you think of the flower of life symbol, you think of the seed of life. You've got this motion, and every time this single particle overlaps itself, you're going to see a reduction in vibration and therefore an increase in mass. And the more it does this, the more it's dancing around, the more you're going to get this variety, which is the spice of life, right? Which is the reason why this takes place in the first place, I feel. And more it descends, the more and more you kind of have this contracted sense of self, right? This ego, this awareness that's seemingly separate from the world around yourself. And it descends and it descends and descends and descends. And this is, of course, the fall of Adam, the descent of the soul into matter. And it can all be explained geometrically. It can all be explained in visual terms, because that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a sacred geometry that's giving birth to the mathematics that we know as like the phi ratio and the Fibonacci spiral, 1.6180339, even pi. All of these divine numbers are being conceived by geometry and architecture. And so if you relate that also to cymatics, where you can see very clearly that actually just some sort of random dispersed sand, when induced with certain vibrations, coordinate themselves based on different tones and harmonics. And this is consciousness itself. It's not just some shape. The shape is just adhering and conforming to the structures that are all around it. And absolutely, we have the same thing going on around our bodies. So as we elevate in consciousness, we can snap to one of these new levels of frequency. And this could be said to be another density of consciousness, Christ consciousness, or the astral plane, or another dimension, right? And so on and so forth, all the way back to what I feel is the symbol behind all of this is the flower of life. And we've been talking about Drunvalo Melchizedek's book, The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life. This is a fascinating subject because it's just really cool, and I think it is actually showing us our true nature as the creator, but also the created. And like, it just gives you the visual of what is actually invisible to us. And of course, spirit is invisible nature, nature is visible spirit. So you can actually get these visuals yourself without having to look at these tools, because you can take certain things like psychedelics. I don't actually support this, but you know, it becomes more and more present, more and more obvious to you. The more you experiment with your consciousness, the more you start engaging in the topic of spirituality and going down that journey. Anyway, I thought I'd just make a quick video on that. because it's just super interesting. New Earth.land to be a part of the change you want to see in the world. If you're on a spiritual journey, it makes sense for us to improve the world in which we live, right? So that's what we're doing here. We're decommodifying shelter, energy, food and water, making those things basic human rights. If you want to be a part of that, New Earth.land. Thanks very much for watching.